Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast. From Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and the palatial FYC studio, you're listening to For Your Consideration,
the podcast featuring roundtable discussions reevaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics. I'm your host, Desmond Friesenham.
And I'm Mike Josic. We'd like to give a shout out to anybody catching the show on iHeartRadio, Stitcher, YouTube, and if you get the show off of iTunes while you're there, we'd love it if you rated and reviewed the show. It does us a lot of good, so helps us out. So this is the fourth installment of our Films of Guillermo del Toro series, which originally started off as our October Fright Fest Spooktacular, our Halloween special episodes, but due to what I'm just going to call life, things have kind of...
Personal issues.
Well, that makes it sound like really negative, and it wasn't all negative, although there was negative. Anyways, that's another podcast.
Due to stuff happening.
Due to stuff. Reasons. We kind of have dragged this out a lot longer than the boundaries of October and Halloween, but we did want to finish the 4 films, and especially since Dustin had watched all 4 films.
Not that I hadn't seen 3 of them before.
No, but you had refreshed. You were you'd seen Hellboy 2 and you were waiting to comment on Hellboy 2. So I was like, I'll just...
You're letting them know that the issues might have been your issues more so than mine.
So, as we've alluded, I think in every episode, for our 4th installment of these films of Guillermo del Toro, we are talking about his second sequel to his other comic book franchise, Hellboy 2, The Golden Army.
AKA the sequel where now that the Nazis have been beat, all of humanity becomes the Nazis.
That's a little harsh.
To be fair, after beating up Germany so hard in World War I and getting all the stuff going on that we did, all the economic issues, we then backed off and let them do whatever the heck they want for forever, despite the fact that that was causing all sorts of problems anywhere that the Germans were involved up until World War II. In Hellboy 2, after kicking the humans' asses with the Golden Army for a little while, they backed off and said, you know what, whatever the humans do, they can do because we feel bad about it. So really, they're taking the place of the world, and the humans are the Nazis who then make a big mess.
I feel like you're stretching it a little bit, but it sounds like you've worked really hard on it.
I don't think that I did, and this is probably the longest explanation for it, which is why it's not very snappy.
Judges? Can we get a ruling? So Guillermo del Toro launched the Hellboy franchise based on the comic book Hellboy by Mike Mignola back in 2004. It was an entertaining film. It didn't do great in theaters. It did really well on video.
It featured one of my favorite random villains. Not quite the villain, but the assassin who was super old and turning to dust.
Oh, Cronin.
I liked Cronin.
The Clockwork guy, yeah.
Loved Cronin.
He actually was going to sort of tie into a character in this film and play out a little more in the third film, which never happened. But 4 years later, they did some finagling. They got to another film, and I think the arrangement was the first film was kind of like establishing things and adapting Mike's thing, and then the second film was Del Toro wanted to do his thing, so it went very fairy tale. It was much bigger, much grander. It's much more of a personal vision for Del Toro. I think
it's about 50% rom-com.
And I think Mignola's involvement was... I mean, he's all there. He's never... His hands have probably touched almost everything on this movie. But it was kind of guided by Del Toro very much from a design standpoint, from a story... I mean, Del Toro wrote the screenplay for it. So this was a passion project for him. He did Pan's Labyrinth. Then he came on to do Hellboy 2. He kind of had that Soderbergh model where he was kind of doing one for them, one for me, studio, indie. Only he does the American movie and the Mexican movie or Spanish movie. Yeah, this movie really broadened things. It was a very different tone. It had a lot of different characters. We'll get into more of the details of what he accomplished in the film and what the film was sort of trying to do as we get into our discussion. But just before we get into the credits and do that talk, as we like to do, as I like to do. I honestly don't know what Dustin's opinion on it is. I like to just point out when we do watch what media we watched it on, and in this case, it is the 2008 Blu-ray that was released by Universal. I don't think there's been another release. I think this is the only one that's out there, and it's a really great package.
Minus the cover, which is just bland as heck for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about the marketing of this thing, and that's probably one of the first things that I'm going to want to talk about. But, yeah, if you don't have this and you're a Hellboy fan, I don't know, maybe something's wrong with you. It's got some really great features. It's loaded with features. There's a couple good commentaries on it. It's definitely worth getting into and checking out. So, 2008 Universal Blu-ray was what we consumed this film on. Now, to the credits for the film, and then we can get to the discussion. Hellboy 2 was directed by Guillermo del Toro. It was produced by Lawrence Gordon, Mike Richardson, and Lloyd Levin. The screenplay was by Guillermo del Toro, based on a story by Guillermo del Toro and Mike Mignola. It starred Ron Perlman, Selma Blair, Doug Jones, Jeffrey Tambor, and John Hurt, and also Guillermo del Toro as the voice of just about every monster and creature. Music was by Danny Elfman. Cinematography was by the wonderful Guillermo Navarro. It was edited by Bernat Villaplana. It was distributed by Universal Pictures, and it was released on July 11th, 2008. The movie was generally well-reviewed and well-received.
Obviously not enough to get the third movie.
But that, I think, has a lot to do with rights and production companies and people just thinking in terms of, like, sure, if we release this movie, like, what's our return on investment going to be? Because this movie was made for, like, I think $85 million. And all told, it grossed, I think, domestically $160 million. So it doubled its budget. But either for whatever they have planned for sorry, I should say that in past tense because there's a new Hellboy movie coming out in 2019, and the threequel is now officially long dead. But what they had planned for the third movie, maybe budget-wise, was too much, or maybe there was just no studio. Like, I don't think Universal got exactly what they wanted out of this movie. I think what they got was essentially Guillermo del Toro because they got a couple of movies out of him.
It only made $85 million. It only made back double its budget. Like, what do you want?
Yeah, but I mean, it's a very niche sort of product, I guess.
Niche all you want. It made back double. Like, come on.
But, you know, okay.
What's the worst case scenario? It only makes $20 million at the box office? Next one?
Here's a great time to bring in the marketing. In these days of media and movie marketing and selling a movie to the public, perhaps the budget of the proposed film, perhaps the marketing budget of said film, like maybe all of those things, the studio just wasn't thinking they were going to make their money back on it. And honestly, I'm surprised. We were talking about this just seconds ago. You look at the poster for the movie and it's kind of a great image of Hellboy, you know, sort of punching the ground, but it doesn't speak anything about the film other than the fact that Hellboy is in it. It's not a really great marketing tool, in my opinion. And then you look at the Blu-ray, and it's just like this. I think I'm going to post a picture on Twitter or on Facebook for anybody who's curious to take a look at it. It's like a black background and a lenticular piece, which has a Mignola Hellboy and a Ron Perlman Hellboy face, which you can like wiggle back and forth. And then you slide it out of the slipcase, and you've just got your case, and it's just a picture of Ron Perlman. A really close picture of Ron Perlman's face.
With all sorts of black space just around it for no reason. It doesn't fade into anything. It's smaller than the first one. It looks worse than Slapshod, really.
Like, if you saw this on the shelf and you didn't know what Hellboy was, there's no reason. There's nothing in the imagery on this to make you go, ooh, that could be interesting. You look at the stuff for the first movie, it was that great kind of upward shot silhouette kind of Hellboy, or you got the Drew Struzan poster. I mean, there was a lot of great stuff out there.
Not a close-up that's so heavy that you can't even see his mutton chops.
Which are important. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe the studio was just like, you know what? We just don't want to do it. We don't feel like it. And I know that there was a campaign that Del Toro had started up on Twitter where he said, look, I want everybody to tell me, do you want me to do this? Because I will talk to the other two guys, Mignola and Perlman, and see if we can get this going. And I know Perlman was interested for a really long time. I think Dark Horse wanted to go a different direction, and I think Mignola wanted to go a different direction, and that's when they got, you know, the new thing going where they're going to adapt The Wild Hunt loosely. And they got the guy from Stranger Things, who I can't remember his name. It's David something, the guy who played the sheriff, Eleven's adopted dad. So that killed it. And it's unfortunate because I think there was it would have been nice to have that 3-part story like rounded out and finished off.
Especially since they do hint at it big time. They mention it in the first one that he's slated to destroy the world, and in the second one where she's given a choice to revive him to save Hellboy, it's like he will destroy the world. Like, there's your third movie right there, something involving that. You get to his past, and then it finishes off. It'll round it out nicely, completed. Does nobody in Hollywood even just think, it would be nice to complete this story that we have started?
And that crystal diopter moment where Abe looks at Hellboy and sees the horns and the flaming crown, and he's like, "Whoa!" Definitely, they were definitely seeding a third movie.
So, like, what was Mignola hoping to do? Was he hoping to just keep that going on somewhere else?
I think Mignola probably would have been happy at one point to finish it off, but there's a momentum thing in Hollywood where things just don't happen in a certain amount of time. They're not going to happen, and then it takes like 10, 15 years.
And then they probably just remake it.
They'll remake it, or they'll do something like Blade Runner 2049 or Tron Legacy, and then people either get angry or they embrace it, but nobody goes to see it. They're very rarely successful. Men in Black 3 is a great movie, but nobody talks about it.
I've never seen it, to be honest.
There you go.
After the second one where What's-His-Face comes back, it's like, no, that was the whole premise of the first one, and now he's coming back as an agent. Fuck off.
No.
You're shitting on the first one.
Settle down. So
I will not settle down.
I'm assuming it was a while for me since I last saw it. I'm assuming it's been a while for you since you last saw it.
I saw it in theaters with my dad. He was a big fan of Hellboy and Ron Perlman.
And you hadn't seen it since then?
No, I have not.
So what was your take on the film, revisiting it recently?
I was expecting less because I was disappointed in Blade 2. And then when I realized that Cronin wasn't in there, I was also slightly disappointed because I was looking forward to seeing some more of that silly guy.
He super died in the first one.
I remember he super died. I don't remember which one he super died in. It's been a decade.
I guess Whistler technically super died in the first Blade, and he came back in the next one, so touche.
I'm just saying that I forgot, if that's all right, sir. I eventually remembered what he sort of had to do with anything. But what I'm noticing this time is that historical allegory that kind of annoys me, where it's, we really kind of were jerks, so let's let them do whatever the heck they want. And they're watching as the humans just destroy the entire world, and they're relegated into dark corners. And it's like, why are you allowing this to happen? Isn't there not a slightly more diplomatic thing you can do? Because really, the prince has a good point. We're destroying everything.
Shopping malls and parking lots.
We kill off the last, forest elemental because he sets it loose on us. However many of other things were just slaughtered by us in complete ignorance. Even just talk to us. Be friggin' running around talking about man, bear, pig and how we can't ruin the environment. Just do something other than just wait for your entire species to die off like idiots because you feel bad that you won a war very handily.
I do think that's part of the fable quality of the film, and there's that line from the king where he says, yep, they do what they do, which is ruin shit, and we do what we do, which is honor the truce. These are our natures. And Prince Nuada...
We don't even know about the truce. At that point, is there even a truce?
Yeah, it's true. Like, they're the only ones who remember the truce. It's pretty fucking tragic.
And you can honor the truce while still living on an island somewhere instead of literally in... How do you even set up these sewers? You set up these boiler rooms, hiding out in the middle of nowhere. You had to wait for us to build stuff and then sneakily go in there. You're on purpose hiding. And I know that that's necessary for the world that was created, but
they did
at least make it an alternate dimension.
They did say, you keep to the cities, we'll keep to the forest. And then we just kind of took the forest.
Which means we weren't honoring the truce.
No, I know.
At that point, the truce is also broken.
I know. But I think they were just capitulating and being like, okay, well, no, we'll just move further in. We'll just move, and then, well...
They can annex the Sudetenland land, all right.
We'll just move further down until we're in sewers and boiler rooms. Yeah, very much. And that was super intentional. That's totally like what Guillermo's kind of going in, like... He talks about this movie being a bit of an anti-summer movie, an anti-superhero movie, because, all the payoffs that you want to have, like the big monster shows up under the Brooklyn Bridge when the big when the big forest elemental comes out. And I mean, he's like essentially a god. Hellboy has to kill him.
And he's given the choice. He's like, are you going to kill him, really, for these humans who are dicks to you? And after he saves them, the humans are dicks to him.
Super dicks, yeah. And
it's like, I just saved your baby. Get away from my baby, you monster. I just saved all of you. Gah, monster. What the hell's wrong with you idiots?
Where normally you would have the very bold, noble hero killing the giant, horrible monster who's destroying things. Here it's subverted, and you have a situation where you feel sad.
The big, horrible monster is making a forest.
And to be fair, like, he was trying to kill Hellboy, and he was trying to trash shit. But there's that gray area. Like, he's very determined to make sure that Prince Nuada doesn't come off as an unsympathetic villain. And I fucking love Prince Nuada.
He is still a turd. But that's just because nobody's trying any other means other than complete 100% capitulation and genocide. There's no middle ground.
He's got that line where he says, which Holocaust are you going to choose? Because it's basically them or us. And Hellboy wants very much to belong to the human world, but he starts to experience this other world. He sees the troll market. He's encountering Prince Nuada and Princess Nuala, and he's starting to realize that, I kind of belong over here because these people don't look at me, see me as freaks. But these people who I want to be a part of do see me as freaks. And so he's got that conflict as well. And what I loved about Nuada, I like his performance. This is Luke Goss, who also played Nomak in Blade 2. It's the same Reaper leader guy. I love the look of the character. I love the flaws of the character. I love the ideology and the way he's utilized in the film. I love his relationship with his sister, which has some borderline incestuous kind of intonations to it. And I love the tragedy of his character. I think I'm genuinely attracted to characters that have a tragic element to them.
I love gray morality myself, but as I said, my main issue is that everyone goes to such extremes without any sort of middle ground at any point. He was in exile for how long?
Well, he'd been searching for the Golden Army, I think. Like, he exiled himself. He probably brooded for a while. He probably watched how shitty the humans have been, and then he probably made his decision where he's like, okay, I'm going to do this Golden Army thing.
As opposed to ever try talking to anyone.
Very proud man.
Stoop myself to actually speaking to humans? Screw that.
There is also an interesting thing that I noticed on this viewing, which I've never seen in any other viewing, despite having watched the commentary where Del Toro mentions it years ago. In the fight scene in the BPRD where they're in the library, you have... And they consistently refer to each other, the BPRD characters. Hellboy is red.
What's his face?
Abe is blue, yeah. Although Tambor Manning, he calls him Fish Stick. I can't remember what Selma Blair's nickname was, but when you get to that library and you get to that fight, you have Princess Nuala wearing the blue dress, and she's got the relationship with Abe, and Abe's kind of referred to as blue and has that blue, the blueness to him. And then you look at Hellboy, who wears black and red, and you look at Prince Nuada, who's wearing black and red.
I thought he was wearing gold.
Not in the library. He had a black tunic with a red sash. And
all these costume changes.
Del Toro was saying that he was tying those characters together thematically through color and costuming. I thought that was amazing. And also, he's saying Hellboy and Nuada are not entirely dissimilar. Because Hellboy is pig-headed, Hellboy is stubborn, Hellboy doesn't listen to other people. Hellboy gets an idea stuck in his head and he just, bull in a china shop until either something gets destroyed and it's ended or he gets his way.
Because certainly early on in the film, he's like, wait, I can totally get us exposed if I'm a turd right now, because nobody wants me to go out and be the hero that I definitely want to be. Gets himself thrown out in the public, and boom.
I do really wonder, he acts like such a child. And Del Toro even says that he has a very childlike manner because of the way he's been sheltered. Like, what does Liz see in him? Why does she like him so much if she has to handle all this emotional labor?
Well, what was kind of stated, or at least what I see there, is that he's somebody who doesn't look at her like a freak or with fear like all these other people do. Like, that's all she wants.
And he's not hurt by her fire.
Definitely helpful. Especially since she seems to have a bit of a temper. But it seems also to be extremely reasonable to want to just blast him through a wall every so often. He is such a massive turd after all.
I did like that line later in the film where she says she's given the option by the angel of death, where she's like, he's going to cause the apocalypse. Do you want him to live or die? And she's like, I choose the living. And he's like, you're going to be really disappointed. You're going to suffer more than anybody. And she's like, I'll deal with it. For me, I felt a lot in that line because there's the love part of it, which is sweet. There's the little tragic element where she knows that this is probably a doomed love. But then it also like bothered me again that she was just willing to take on this burden, this bullshit. Even though they needed Hellboy to help save the world from Prince Nuada, that's not really why she was making the decision.
I'd say that the decision would have been made beforehand. If he's destined to destroy the world, there was no other way that could have gone.
But the blade that Nuada left in his chest, like, would kill him if they tried to remove it, and he was either going to bleed out from having that thing in there, or the thing was going to, like...
No, I mean, her decision was already predetermined, because otherwise he wouldn't be slated to destroy the world, and otherwise there'd be no world slated to destroy. It would be already gone. It's one of those things with prophecy where you get the determinism versus free will. I guess.
I mean, that was definitely like a turning point. That was definitely... I feel like Liz could have chosen to let Hellboy die.
And if that's the case,
But then the Golden Army would have killed everybody. There would have been an apocalypse no matter what.
But it wouldn't have been caused by him.
Exactly.
And if there was choice in that, then he, of course, doesn't necessarily have to destroy the world, which is how the third one would have ended, because they would have had a happy ending anyway, because it would be a summer blockbuster, and that's how they do them. But about sometime in the middle of 75% of the way through the movie, it would be really leaning in the other direction.
That actually, you kind of brought it back to that whole summer blockbuster thing, and that's something that I wanted to hammer on a little bit more, where, we've talked with most of these movies, with the exception of maybe Kronos, because Kronos is kind of its own, lives in its own little bubble. But with movies like Mimic and Blade 2, which are movies that you have a certain expectation of them, here's another summer movie. It's a comic book movie. By this point, we were seeing more comic book movies. People had expectations of what superheroes and comic book movies should give us. Here, he kind of gives us that action adventure, but he does that Del Toro thing where he subverts it, or he twists it, or just injects it with more meaning, more subtlety, more thematically, more design-wise. Even though I have some troubles with the pacing of the film, I still think he does more with this than a lot of other people would do with a similar concept. And I really appreciate the fact that he likes to turn it upside down a little bit. He says the weirder the concept, the more attracted he is to it.
I can agree entirely with all of that.
You didn't agree so much with Blade. You didn't feel like he did the same flippy dip.
No, I did not. Here, other than my major complaints, I enjoy the movie. It is a fun little movie, and it's definitely got its comedy in there. As I said, it's sort of a rom-com, if anything, because most of the issue is between him and Liz, and, of course, Abe and Nuala, who start a little will they, won't they?
It's true.
Until it turns out that all she ever had to do is kill herself, which, if you want to talk about the apocalypse, she might have done anyway, had Hellboy remained dead. So was there really any danger? Who knows? And then, of course, at the very end, everyone just says, you know what? Screw this. We're going off on our own. We're retiring.
That's actually a part of the movie I really liked, the quitting. Hellboy quits in the comic book and goes on a worldwide adventure, but
it actually helps kind of make it the two-parter work a little bit.
I agree.
It would almost be interesting just to see little postcards posted every now and then from a Hellboy Twitter account. Just show famous places, have Ron Perlman dressed up as... I want to see this. Ron Perlman, get on it. Go travel around the world. Do that.
I wonder if part of the reason why it didn't happen is Perlman's age. I mean, with all that makeup, I don't think it would have made a difference. And from what I've seen of Perlman now, I feel like it would have been very similar. But I do wonder.
Just the stunts?
Yeah. And, speaking of stunts, that was actually a pretty good segue. We talked about the fight scenes in Blade 2, and you don't see a lot of real hardcore fights in Del Toro movies, except in Blade 2 and Hellboy 2. There's maybe a little bit in Pacific Rim as well, actually.
But does it count when it's giant robots?
No, they do some martial arts and training
the
or whatever.
martial art
Yeah,
and training, the two
but
of
it's
them.
not really like a big set piece kind of thing. Whereas in Blade 2 and Hellboy 2, very much so, the fights are very important. You have the fight in the troll market. You have the fight with Prince Nuada in the library. You have the fight with Prince Nuada with the Golden Army in the chamber. There's...
You even have the fight between Hellboy and the ectoplasm guy.
Oh, that's right, yeah. Johann Kraus. Smoky Dude, voiced by Seth MacFarlane. A Family Guy fame.
I wouldn't have guessed that.
You look at the fights in Hellboy 2, and it's even more of a step up from Blade 2. I felt like Del Toro did some really interesting fights in Blade 2, but I felt like the choreography and the shooting and the editing of the fights was totally amped up in this movie. Like, I don't think of Del Toro as an action movie fight director, but watching this again, it kind of put me back in that headspace where I was like, oh no, he can do this. He can totally do this, and he's pretty good at it. And he doesn't just like to do straight up fight scenes. He likes to do stuff. The final scene in the Clockworks with the Golden Army around, he didn't want to just do another fight with a bunch of wire work. So they choreographed a fight scene where they got somebody who could do like tumbling. The stunt double for Prince Nuada, like none of that has any wire work. All the flips, all the twists, all the bouncing. The floor was actually layered with trampolines and certain spots where the choreography would allow him to do the bouncing and the flipping and the spinning. No wires. The Hellboy stunt guy did have some wire work, very minor wire work, which I think had more to do with just how hard it probably is to jump around in Hellboy costume with like those boots look like they're 20-pound boots.
Are you saying it's hard to jump 20 feet when you're in giant costumes?
Exactly.
And instead it turns into sort of like a Castlevania, the clock level scene where everyone's going up and down on giant gears.
But I thought it was a beautifully choreographed fight, and I thought it was shot really well, and I just wanted to point out, I think Del Toro matured very much in that vein of filmmaking, and it would have been cool to see where they went with the next one. I don't know, how did you feel about the fights?
The fights were the fights. That wasn't honestly what I was looking for in the movie.
It wasn't what I was looking for either, but, things like Mr. Wink. The fact that Mr. Wink and Hellboy could actually have a fight. There was... The only, digital stuff on Mr. Wink was his mouth. The rest of it was a fully articulated puppet. They were actually hitting it with the right hand of doom.
I do like how Nuada and Hellboy were not sort of evenly matched. They were two different types of fighters.
Yeah.
A brawler and a agile guy. Because normally you watch these movies... And it's like, okay, I'm watching Infinity War. Oh, here's the chick. We better bring in the only other chick in order to fight them. Oh, here's the agile person. Better get this other agile person to fight them. And it's always like you have your type that you're allowed to fight against.
They both all know the same kung fu.
There's the karate guy. We got to get the other karate guy in here. What? Capoeira? Screw that. Not unless we're fighting with other capoeira guy. No, it's ridiculous. So I liked how... They were entirely mismatched. That creates much more interesting scenes, I feel.
Nuada was much faster, much more agile, and kind of all over the place. And Hellboy was a bit more of a tank. He was using his right hand to block. He didn't really have any other weapon because...
Gun wasn't doing crap.
And he lost the sword too. But yeah, I like that. I like the... Again, he went into these fight scenes. He didn't want to just do fight scenes. He wanted to do something a little bit cooler, something with a little bit more texture. I really appreciate that.
Even with Mr. Wink, even though it was sort of just brute against brute, the scenario, the locale, made the difference there.
Yeah.
Especially since it wasn't at the forefront of what was going on. You also had the other characters running around doing other things, and there's just Hellboy flying in out of stage left, and it's like, what the hell's going on here?
One of my favorite scenes in the Troll Market, this is getting away from the fights for a second, or maybe for good, if we don't get back to it. But when he's on the radio and he keeps, communicating with Liz, and he's just like, oh, this place is so cool. You would love it. I'm totally bringing you here. It was just such a cute little, relationship moment. And he was so enamored with the Troll Market. What got them there was that old Scottish troll lady, and she was about to eat the cat, and he's like, no, I'm not going to let her eat the cat. Once he's in the Troll Market, somebody walks by with, a basket of cats who are obviously going to be eaten. Hellboy doesn't even notice. He's just too busy looking around. He's just like, oh my god, nobody looks at us funny here. This is awesome.
Although there, I figure they would definitely look at Liz funny.
They might. Yeah, they might. Unless she was on fire at the time.
Or unless they're used to having the odd shaman or whatever with magical abilities come in and hang out a little bit.
And that's probably why she wasn't there. They didn't want to have to explain that. What did you think of the... one of the themes... This seems to run through most of Del Toro's films, and we've talked about this 3 times previous now. Paternity, fidelity, fertility. There's babies in this movie. There's father figures. There's tension there. And they don't like really drill it, but it's coded into so much. The tumor baby, the billboard, the decisions, let's make them together.
Well, that's because they're very worried about, or a lot of that was just hinting at the fact that Liz was pregnant and keeping it from Hellboy.
Mm-hmm. But I'm just saying, like, how did you feel about those themes? How did you feel about bringing in that fertility and I mean, there's that big giant fertility idol right at the beginning of the movie. You know, Del Toro kind of starts off with it, hey, here's a theme. And then when the tooth fairies come out of the wall, it's like another pregnant belly where it and then it bursts. I mean, there's so much in this movie that's coded with that. And it's something that we've talked about in Blade 2, in Mimic, and in Chronos to a certain respect.
And honestly, I didn't notice it as being fertility specifically. I always thought of it as being just everything sort of happening around Liz, just forcing her to have to tell Hellboy what's actually going on with the pregnancy. Just a big old message to her, because as I said, I see this movie as almost a rom-com, if anything, because it follows their relationship just as much as it follows anything having to do with the Golden Army or anything like that.
That whole pregnancy thing with her wanting to or not wanting to tell him, it does kind of have almost a sitcom-y kind of plot development to it. And then they're drunk over the bed talking about it, and then she's like, Abe!
And of course, Abe figures out because of the very sitcom-y, whatever accidental thing, and the best friend figures out, but he's not allowed to tell. It fits a lot of tropes when it comes to that.
He's like, oh, you're pregnant. She's like, no, I'm not. He's like, oh, yes, you are. And then that scene is like right in front of the wall swelling and the tooth fairies bursting out. It's subtle, but not subtle. I like it. I like the fact that he's continuing to explore these themes and trying them through different lenses in different films, kind of seeing how they fit. And it's obviously something that he thinks a lot about. As, you know, Catholicism, parental figures, motherhood, fatherhood.
Interspecies sex.
Speaking of which...
Shape of Water?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And hell, there's Abe Sapien in that movie, pretty much.
Though I did read a rather interesting review which says, imagine the genders were switched, and you had a mute mermaid, and the guy sort of pushing himself on her.
Mm-hmm.
When I see the movie for the first time, I'm going to keep that in mind.
Oh, you haven't seen it yet?
I have not.
Oh, I thought you'd seen it already. Because I saw it at Christmas time, and I thought you saw it shortly afterwards. But yeah, I guess this does involve interspecies love, and it does involve a fish man. At the end of the movie, there's the moment where Abe and Nuala put their hands together. That's basically kind of the equivalent of a kiss for them, Del Toro said.
Well, if you can manipulate or read emotions through that, you can get all sorts of funky stuff going on.
I thought
Look at the Asari in Mass Effect and how they have sex.
I thought it was kind of cool, and having heard Del Toro say that, that scene was amplified a little bit for me and took on a little bit more sweetness, I guess, and it's a bittersweetness, I guess, because she's dying. But it was kind of a beautiful moment, I thought.
I definitely feel sad for Abe and Noelle that they didn't get to explore anything.
I feel like Abe would have screwed it up.
As a turd.
I feel like Abe would have screwed it up.
He would have screwed it up, but he would have done so out of naive innocence and the fact that he's never been in any sort of situation like that.
It would be
before.
that clumsy first relationship. Yeah. Clumsy, wet fumblings in the dark. And it would probably be kind of creepy if Nuada was still alive for those two to have any kind of fun. Although
Which means that might be her first relationship too, in theory.
There was an implication of some weird incestuous stuff in the library when he's like brushing his hand across her face. He gets a little too close and there's a little too much intimacy there. And listening to the Del Toro commentary where he said, yes, we were implying maybe things have gone to an uncomfortable sort of place here at some point. That just made my head go, if you feel what the other person's feeling and you're like doing it with the other person who's feeling the same things that you're feeling,
that would be amplified to some crazy degree that Abe would have no way to compete with.
That would be so trippy. so trippy. That's like exponentially crazier than even like the best.
How is Abe going to compete? Poor guy.
I don't know.
Other than the telepathic.
He does have the telepathic, so Abe can get deeper inside than anybody.
On this episode of Psychic Bestiality.
Interspecies.
Incestuous.
Yes.
This is a family show, Mike.
No, it's not. Music. I want to talk about the music because...
You always do.
I often do, yeah. But this score was done by Danny Elfman. I don't like it. I feel that Danny Elfman... There's a couple of cues that are actually beautiful and that I really enjoy. But there are a couple of times where Danny Elfman just goes full Danny Elfman, and I kind of don't feel that Hellboy is a movie that needs a Danny Elfman score. Kind of like I don't think Justice League was a movie that needed a Danny Elfman score. Those Tim Burton Batmans, Edward Scissorhands, Planet of the Apes, love them or hate them, those movies all have great scores, and Danny Elfman is responsible for them. But here I didn't love it. And I kind of wondered, did it stick out like a sore thumb to you too, or did it just kind of blend in and fit all right?
It blended in. It fit all right. It wasn't calling all freaks coming blaring at me, making me think, wow, that's 90s.
Although funny you mention that, because there are a number of pop songs that are in this.
But they're done as, this is what he's listening to right now.
Not necessarily, because there's a montage, and there's another scene which I'm trying to remember. It's early on. Yeah, I liked it. It was interesting having different kind of music in the film. And that might have been because I was disliking the Danny Elfman score as much as I was. I much preferred the Marco Beltrami score from the original Hellboy. I kind of like when Marco Beltrami and Del Toro work together. I think really cool things happen.
What other stuff did he do with Beltrami?
Well, he did Mimic with Beltrami. I believe that was their first collaboration. They also did Blade 2 together. For a filmmaker that I love as much as I love Del Toro, I find it so hard to put his films in sequence of when they happened.
Well, they are all over the place in terms of country, content, language.
So I think it was just 3 movies with Beltrami. But I think that 3 really cool scores came out of it. And I feel like it would have been cool to have Beltrami do another Hellboy. Maybe he wasn't available. I don't know. I'm not loving...
Maybe he'll do the next Hellboy anyway in 2019.
Unlikely, but possibly. He is still working. He is still doing superhero movies. He did the Fantastic Four score.
I don't recall his name prior to today, and I'll forget it in about 10 minutes.
Probably. Despite the fact that we've discussed him twice before on the podcast.
Oh, really?
On the Blade 2 and the Mimic episodes. Okay, I don't know if I have anything else to add to this. You said you had some major problems with the film. Do we want to talk problems? I just mentioned the music being a problem for me.
Well, as I already went through my problems, this is the first thing I started with. Just the political background of everything everyone's doing. It's just ridiculous to me in this world or any other one. You can look at stuff like, of course, the initial people who signed the truce are, I guess, immortal. Everyone is immortal in that side, just so that we have the same players as were there initially, which is your classic fantasy bit. They always seem to do that.
Oh, what did you think of the opening sequence with the puppets? When Broom is telling young Hellboy the story, it was originally supposed to be done Lord of the Rings style with like a whole bunch of people in suits of armor and whatever, and it was budgeted for that too. And Del Toro
went with the howdy doody.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it was digital, but I love the look of it. I love watching it. Like, it's such a great opening sequence.
I'd completely forgotten about it until you mentioned it just now, that they had the opening sequence with Bucktooth Hellboy up in the Arctic research camp.
Young Bucktooth Hellboy, not one of my favorite things in this movie.
No.
It was played a little too, oh gosh golly, gee.
He had a very punchable face and attitude.
Yes. I'm not against young Hellboy, who's made appearances in the comic books. I just don't know if they pulled it off properly in this film. That and the music and the pacing, it was a little meandering at times. It didn't feel as driven, but I know they were dealing a lot more with character. They wanted to get into the character arcs a little bit more. So, what did you think of Hellboy, his character arc coming around at the end and basically being...
It makes me want to check out the first Hellboy just to see what his character arc was there, to see if it's if it's a continuation or if it's almost a bit of a repeat.
It's not a repeat, because in this one, he's challenged with the idea of whose tribe does he basically belong to? Who does he want to belong to?
But also the notion of responsibility.
Yeah. At the end, he's got Nuada on the ground and he goes, I win, you live. Normally he would have just killed him or bashed him or because he's the bad guy. But Hellboy realizes he may be the bad guy, but he's got a point. And I kind of agree with him, and I feel bad for killing the big giant monster, and maybe people aren't as cool as I wished that they were. And he chooses not to belong to the human world or to the fairy world. He chooses to belong to Liz. Liz was his choice.
Which is a good choice.
Yeah, it's a good choice.
But going back to Nuada's death, Nuala really didn't have to kill herself. I mean, he's coming up from behind Hellboy, just, slash your own arm, something like that. Something to distract. Don't need to slit your own throat.
I think she realized that he would never stop.
He might never stop, but you could stop him. He could be a prisoner forever, locked up in whatever.
Maybe she didn't want Abe to find out about incestuous fairy sex. That might be a hard relationship hurdle to get past.
She's been putting up with all sorts of stuff for a long time.
She could also just
feel this is the last straw.
She could have been just tired. It could have been like, what? Dad's dead. Everything's shit.
Why should we have... Let's make a power vacuum. Let's get this power vacuum on.
This is why we can't have nice things.
Even though I'm the most reasonable person here who's searching for peace and who just found somebody new, let's create a power vacuum.
I liked Anna Walton's performance as Nuala. I think she brought a lot to the character who didn't have a lot to do.
I would say she read across exactly as she should have and did a good job doing so.
Yeah.
And I would also say, given that he wasn't supposed to be magical at all, he created quite the golden army, that goblin.
This is true. We kind of ironically haven't really talked about the golden army very much, if at all.
I mean, they could have come up with whatever deal they had, actually talked to the humans, and then flung the golden army out into space, because what's it going to do then?
Even though they're a huge set piece at the end, I do feel like the golden army is just kind of a MacGuffin.
Oh, it's MacGuffin all up the wazoo.
Because even when you get to the end, there is a bit of a fight sequence, but then they just stand back and they wait for whoever wins the crown from the duel. I did like that duel moment where he challenges him and he's like, you can't challenge me. And it's like, no, wait, he's the son of the fallen one. So he is royalty. I thought, that's cool, because that nods to like the next movie, plus it nods to sort of the background. It puts this boorish, childlike, goofball character, our hero, in this interesting... It makes you think of him a little bit differently in that moment. He's got some street cred.
I'd say that's the opposite of street cred, at least for me, because he didn't earn that. He was just born with that, and that's total BS when it comes to street cred.
Okay, so he has aristocrat cred.
There you go.
Aristocred.
He has credentials.
Aristocred. I'm coining this.
Not to be mistaken with Aristocats, because then he'll get in trouble.
All right, so what do we think of Hellboy 2? Dustin, your final thoughts?
I think it is a fun little movie that is definitely worth checking out for anyone interested in this genre of movie or adjacent genres.
I liked it too. I liked it a little bit less than I did the first time I saw it. I loved this movie previously. Del Toro loves this movie. This was one of his favorite films. It was one of the most difficult ones ever to work on, but it's one of his favorite. He says a lot of him is in it, probably prior to Shape of Water. But anyways, it's fun. It's great. It's a nice continuation. It's a middle movie. It really should have had a third movie to cap it off. I think it would have made a really wonderful trilogy. There's some fun stuff in it. Some great makeup, some great animatronics, some great practical effects, good writing, good acting. Score's a little off, but... yeah, if you like the first Hellboy, you'll like the second Hellboy. If you like Del Toro, you'll probably like this movie.
And if you're expecting the same voice actor for Abe Sapien, you'll be confused for half the movie when you're trying to place the voice.
They realized that Doug Jones's voice was very similar to David Hyde Pierce's voice, and they were like, he's playing the character anyway, let's just use his voice. And then you don't have to pay David Hyde Pierce. And when they told David Hyde Pierce, he was like, well, yeah. He was happy to do it, but he's like...
why was I doing it in the first place?
Yeah, he had no problems with it whatsoever.
Can you save him?
It is for you to decide that. It is all the same to me. My heart is filled with dust and sand. But you should know, it is his destiny to bring about the destruction of the earth. Not now, not tomorrow, but soon enough. Knowing that, you still want him to live. So, child, make the choice. The world or him.
Him.
The time will come, and you, my dear, will suffer more than anyone.
I'll deal with it. Now save him.
It is done.
So that's 2 thumbs up for Hellboy 2. And that concludes our look at 4 Del Toro movies. If you're curious...
At 3 Ron Perlman movies, if you want to look at it that
way. Exactly. Feel free to go back and check out the previous episodes. Kronos, Mimic, Blade 2, and Hellboy 2 were the ones we chose to look at, because they're the ones that not as many people talk about. You always hear about Devil's Backbone, you always hear about Pan's Labyrinth, Shape of Water. And as much as I would have liked to have talked about Crimson Peak or Pacific Rim, I wanted to talk about these more. So we may talk about more Del Toro movies in the future beyond the 2 that are on the Sight and Sound list. We'd like to know what you guys think. Feel free to let us know what you thought of this episode, our ideas, or how you feel about the Hellboy 2 movie. Hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're FYC Show, or just search For Your Consideration. You'll usually find us. We have the WordPress blog, fycshow.wordpress.com. Or is it wordpress.com/fycshow? It's one of the 2.
It's linked through other stuff.
It is. It's so much easier that way. And feel free to check out our Patreon campaign if you want to support the show in ways more financially measurable. We got different reward levels. Check that out. We'd really appreciate that.
And check us out hopefully next week when we will be coming back with a gaggle of angry dudes.
I'm not 100% sure when this particular episode will drop, but the next episode after this will be 12 Angry Men, the Sidney Lumet film, which brings us back into the fold of our usual format, talking about classic films and whether we think they're masterpieces or museum pieces. If anybody's listening to this episode who's never heard the show previous, that's normally what we do. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your support, as always. Thank you for your patience in what has been a troubling October.
A troubling third quarter.
It was a troubling... Yeah, that's fair. I was going to say a troubling October with some collateral damage in November, but I like yours better.
We'll try to get the fourth quarter numbers. Those are rookie numbers.
We're going to finish November strong. We're going to hit December hard. And then 3rd anniversary, man. January.
What will we do for it?
I don't know.
Probably not much. Hopefully release an episode.
So that officially rounds up the Fright Fest Spooktacular. Join us next time when we talk about 12 Angry Men. I've been your host, Mike Josick.
And I've been Dustin Friesman. Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time.
Adios.
You're all a bunch of bums.